The townsfolk froze when the saloon doors creaked open, and James Dalton walked in, 7 years after vanishing. Mud clung to his boots like grave dirt, and in his hand he held his wife's wedding shawl, dug fresh from her coffin. He pinned it to the wall, with one word carved beneath: Bragg. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The piano stopped mid-note. Cards froze mid-air, half folded in the hands of a gambler whose fingers no longer remembered motion. The barkeep, who'd been polishing a cloudy glass with the same stained rag for years, dropped it without noticing the crash. Even the whores upstairs paused, drawn to the hush that poured through the walls like a ghost riding the cold. Some swore the temperature dropped the moment he stepped in. James Dalton didn't need to be recognized. He was recognition. In every startled breath, in every heart that kicked against ribs not from fear, but from memory. The shawl he carried was limp from weather, stained from time, but its meaning hadn't faded. Folks remembered it. Mary Dalton had worn it on market days, hand-stitched, blue and cream wool, a gift he gave her their first winter on the ridge. She wore it the day she refused Bragg's offer to buy her out, offering cash for the land and a sneer for her dignity. She wore it the day her lips turned gray and her eyes lost their light before the preacher could even bless the soup she'd barely touched. Now that shawl hung on the saloon's cracked plaster wall like a death sentence. Pinned through the middle by a rusted nail, it fluttered once when the wind slipped through the swinging doors behind Dalton, then stilled. Under it, his message. One name, carved into wood with the tip of a knife: Bragg. He didn't say the word. He cut it. Letters jagged, deep. The G still trembled with sap. The bartender opened his mouth, but nothing came out. A woman in the corner crossed herself, and old Tommy Clegg, who used to ride posse for Bragg's men, dropped his drink and didn't bend to pick it up. James didn't turn to face anyone. He walked to the bar, set down a coin that looked older than the town itself, and said just 4 words: whiskey and a room. His voice was low, coarse from disuse, but steady, the same way thunder's steady before it breaks the sky. Nobody moved until he'd taken his glass and climbed the stairs, his steps slow, deliberate, echoing through timber that remembered his weight. Outside, the wind picked up across Fire Ridge, and in the churchyard, the grave stood open, its silence heavier than any sermon. Bragg spat tobacco into the dust, but the sound of it didn't carry, not over the silence pressing in from the townsfolk who had gathered like reluctant witnesses around the saloon porch. Their eyes weren't on Bragg. They were on the man who had risen from the grave of his wife with scripture no longer in his mouth, but reckoning in his hands. James Dalton said nothing at first. He just stood there beneath the rising sun, shadow stretched long across the dirt like a gallows arm. The journal he held was stained dark at the edges, the oilskin cracked, but it bore the marks of careful hands. Mary's hands. Her handwriting, neat and slanted, visible even as the pages trembled in the dry wind. "You lost your mind out there, Dalton?" Bragg's voice cracked through the tension like a whip. He stood tall in a dove-gray coat stitched by foreign tailors, gold watch chains swinging from his vest like a badge. 2 hired men flanked him, overfed with whiskey and iron, but neither looked half as sure as the man they guarded. "No law says you can go dig up a grave and come dragging bones into town," Bragg sneered. James raised the journal, slow and deliberate, like an offering or a curse. "Mary didn't leave bones," he said. "She left words." He walked toward the chapel without looking at Bragg, boots crunching gravel that seemed louder than gunfire. The doors stood open, empty pews inside glowing amber from the morning light. He took the pulpit like a pastor, and then, without preface, began to read. His voice was hoarse, but steady, not loud. You had to lean in to hear. I told him no, Dalton read, but he smiled like I'd said yes. Curtis Bragg does not believe a woman's refusal carries weight. The words landed like stones tossed into still water. No one breathed. A mother held her child tighter. A farmhand took off his hat. I think he means to poison the well, James read on. I've hidden this book in the roots of the cedar behind the house. If something happens, and James asks, someone must find it. From the edge of the crowd, the sheriff shifted. His lip twitched, but he said nothing. Dr. Larrabee said it could be nightshade, Dalton said, voice low now. Said it was best I not press. Bragg don't like being questioned, he said. And then he stopped coming. Bragg's face, once so smug, now looked stretched too tight over something trembling underneath. Still he scoffed. You gonna shoot me with a diary, Dalton? James closed the book and laid it gently on the church steps like it was something sacred, then turned. No dramatics, no speeches, just the weight of the truth in the air behind him. He walked down those steps like a man finished with speaking. Bragg laughed, sharp and brittle. It cracked across the square and fell flat. By sundown, his 2 men had slipped away with their saddlebags full and their loyalty empty. And not long after, a plume of smoke rose above the hill where the banker's mansion stood. It wasn't James who lit the fire, but no one lifted a hand to put it out. Bragg's mansion burned slow, not the kind of fire that roars through timber and screams into the sky, but a deliberate, brooding smolder that clung to the air like accusation. Martha had walked out the front door carrying only her apron and a tarnished locket, set the oil herself, and lit the curtains in the drawing room with 1 match and a shaking hand. She didn't wait to see it catch. Didn't need to. She knew a lie when it started to smoke. The town gathered on porches and sidewalks as the smoke rose, silent and still, like mourners at a hanging. No one stopped her. No one helped Bragg. The fire took its time, eating through polish and pretense, until what was left of his reputation curled in ash against the sky. Bragg reappeared the next day, ragged, red-eyed, and foul with sweat. The silk was gone from his clothes, his collar crooked, hands blistered from trying to save ledgers and silver. He didn't meet anyone's eyes. Just limped up the narrow stairs to his office above the bank, slammed the shutters closed, and didn't come out for days. When he did, he was never alone, flanked by 2 men with hard eyes and dirty coats, not from town. They didn't speak much, just stared too long at passers-by like they were picking out which throat to cut first. But hired men aren't roots. They don't bind. They don't hold steady. They move for coin and drift when the wind changes. James Dalton knew that. He didn't answer with bullets or blood. He answered with silence. Each day, at dawn, he rode to Fire Ridge. He brought cedar, stones, and his own hands. He sanded and stained the new cross himself, oak, strong and bare. No scripture, just a name, Mary. He laid the stones in a circle around her resting place, washed the dust from them, and knelt to plant yellow irises, her favorite. Their bulbs shook in the wind, stubborn little things that reached for sun even as clouds threatened rain. Children watched from the fence. The sheriff watched from the road. Nobody said a word. Then came the last day of summer. James rode into town, coat buttoned, boots clean. Pinned to his chest with a silver clasp was Mary's photo. Faded, smiling, her hair pinned back in the way he used to braid it himself when she was tired. As he walked, people stepped aside, not from fear, but reverence. Even the mutts stopped barking. And Bragg? He stood at the bank door, shotgun trembling in his arms, mouth set like he meant to make legend. James stopped just 10 feet away. He spoke evenly, without heat. Mary never asked for revenge. His hand hovered by his belt. Not fast, not slow, just steady. But I do. Bragg fired first, or tried to. Click. The jam was instant. His eyes went wide. Dalton's revolver barked once, and the banker screamed. The shot struck clean through the flesh of his right hand. The gun dropped, clattered to the boards, and blood followed it in a lazy arc. James stepped forward, laid the revolver gently on the ground beside the shotgun, then turned and walked away, boots clicking calm against the wood. Behind him, Bragg sobbed and cursed, but no one came to help him. No one dared. The town forgot how loud it used to be, not all at once, but slowly, as dust settles after a storm. With Bragg gone, slunk out in the middle of the night with nothing but a carriage, a bandaged hand, and the hollow weight of disgrace, the streets lost their sharpness. No more barked orders from the bank steps, no more polished boots kicking mud from wagons, no more paid smiles from men who never looked you in the eye. James Dalton didn't take his place. He didn't want one. He found a stretch of land past the old quarry, where the grass grew in soft waves and the air smelled of pine and rust. There he built a life small enough to hold in 2 hands. A shed of scrap wood that leaned but never collapsed. A workbench under the sycamore. And a single room where the only photograph was of a woman in a wedding shawl, her smile pressed between glass and memory. He spoke little, but he listened. When Miss Langley's saddle straps tore, she found them stitched with quiet precision 2 days later on her porch rail. When a boy named Caleb carved his name into the schoolhouse bench, he was sent to Dalton with a warning. The boy returned home with a wooden whistle and calloused thumbs, saying nothing, but carrying a cedar shaving in his pocket like a medal. Dalton's hands never stopped. Rocking chairs smoothed into shapes that seemed to carry warmth in their grain. Toys for the church fair. Birdhouses placed high where only the wind would see. He never signed them. He didn't need to. The town left him alone, but not untouched. Every now and then, someone left something on his stoop. A pie, a bundle of thread, a book with no note. And in return, he'd leave behind what he'd made. Always simple, always exacting. One morning, before the frost had fully melted from the shutters, Martha found a box outside her door. Rough-hewn, sanded smooth. Inside, Mary's shawl. Clean, folded, still smelling faintly of cedar. And beneath it, a scrap of paper. She saw you, when no one else did. Thank you for standing in the silence. James Dalton passed in his sleep 3 winters later. No service, no eulogy, but someone carved into his stone. Not the preacher's name, not the gunslinger's legend. Just this. He returned not to kill, but to remember. And in time, the town forgot who he had been with a Bible and a gun, but they remembered who he was with her. They called him husband.